So we're talking about Rosh Hashanah and the recreation of the world. And that's the theme that happens every year. And we've spoken about the fact that Hashem creates the world via speaking. And we've spoken about the fact that Hashem is, for that reason, compared to a king, because they both have something in common. If you speak and nobody's listening, there's no point to speaking. You'll be unmotivated. You won't want to continue speaking. And if you're the king and nobody wants to follow you, then you're not much of a king. So they both have the same kind of a theme that indicates, how Hashem interacts with the world. Now, what we know about human conversation generally, and more specifically, when a person, not just normal conversation, when a person is teaching, so what you'll know is sometimes a person will be talking and then they'll pause. We had a teacher like this. So he'd be explaining and explaining and explaining, and then the next thing, he'd pause his explanation and it'd kind of go off into some, into the academic realm of his brain, and he'd forget that there was a classroom full of students. We had a teacher like that in yeshiva also, that sometimes you'd ask him a question and he'd go deep in thought, and you'd think that he'd forgotten that you were there. Now the truth is, when you're teaching, or even when you're speaking, and sometimes you pause, the reason that you're pausing is for one of two reasons. Either because you have to think, what should I say next? Or because suddenly you had a new idea that you hadn't thought of before. This happens especially when you're teaching. So because you're teaching somebody else, that brings you to, like we said, you grow from the audience. You draw strength from the audience. So because you're explaining something to somebody else, it actually makes you think of a perspective that you hadn't thought of before. Now, of course, you're not ready to share it yet because you've just thought of it now for the first time. So you got to pause for a second, and you got to actually withdraw from the crowd to go into your own mind to think this through so that you can work out, number one, is it valuable? Is it worth sharing? And number two, how to share it. So that could happen in an ordinary conversation. Okay, how should I say this next thing that I want to say? And certainly with teaching, how do I share this in such a way that the students will benefit from it? They'll get the maximum value out of this new concept and thought that I have in my head. Now, if you look at it from the perspective of the teacher, something very profound is happening at this point in time. New information, new insight, new depth. If you look at it from the perspective of the student, something uneasy is happening right now. Oh my, what's happened to my teacher? I thought you were teaching me. I thought I showed you how attentive I was and how involved I was. And I thought because of that you'd give me more, but now it looks like you're actually giving me less. Looks like you've forgotten about me. You've gone off into the recesses of your own mind, and what about me? So you could have two kinds of student. One kind of student says, oh, well, I guess the class is over for today. The teacher was in mid-sentence and then got carried away with his own imagination and he's forgotten about me. So now it's time to pull out something else to do, or to doodle, or maybe even to walk out of the class because the teacher's clearly not interested, so I can go. The other kind of student is smart. The other kind of student says, something is happening here. Something is being developed at this point in time. And if I just have the patience to hang in there until it is fully developed, then I know that what I'm going to get next is going to be superior to whatever I got until now. The good stuff is still to come. So the clever student is going to sit there at the edge of his seat, waiting for what happens next. Now, at the same time that that's happening, it's quite possible that in the teacher's mind, as the teacher constructs this new insight, the teacher could also then start to come out of his reverie and have a look at the student and say, now, I've got a brilliant new thought to share with you, but are you still there? Are you still there? Are you still enthusiastic? Because if you're not, if you've taken the first opinion and you've decided the class is over and you've checked out, then why would I share this brilliant insight with you? You're not interested. But if you're sitting at the edge of your seat and you clearly are waiting to hear what happens next, boy, have I got something amazing to share with you. So you see there's this symbiotic relationship between the teacher and the student where they literally feed off each other. And a lot of how things will progress lies in the hands of the student. If the student plays it well, then the student lands up getting maximum benefit. Now, there's another thing that could happen along the way, and that is it could take long for the teacher to come back to the student. The student is still enthusiastic. However, what the student needs to do is remind the teacher that he's still there. Okay, it's taken a while, and he is enthusiastic, but, at which point is this guy, are you going to wake up? So the student might do something like clear his throat. Right? Just to kind of get attention. Or he might bang on the table. Some kind of a basic sound just to get the teacher's attention to say, I'm still here and I'm still interested. Ideally, actually, he shouldn't just make a basic sound. Ideally, what he would want was to be able to communicate some kind of a sound that tells the teacher, not only am I ready to hear what you want to teach me, what you can now teach me, but I'm actually quite anxious to hear it. I'm not just interested. I'm literally at the edge of my seat. Hello, right? That kind of thing. I'm waiting. So that's what you would want to convey. Every single year, what Hashem does is he speaks, because that's how creation works. And it's an ongoing conversation. This ongoing conversation that Hashem has, the conversation of creation. So whatever's happening today, right now, at this particular point in time, is the unique conversation that Hashem has to create this unique piece of time. And it's a multi-layered conversation, because what he creates for you is different to what he creates for me, which is different to what he creates for the guy down the road. So even though generally speaking, we're all going through the same creation, which is that it's a nice blue sky day and it's warm and it's spring and it's wonderful, the fact is each one of us is getting a very unique message. But whatever Hashem has said over the last 12 months is all part of one themed conversation, the theme that he launched last Rosh Hashanah. That was the unique overarching energy for this month that began on last Rosh Hashanah, and it's a running conversation with all of its details, but the theme was decided, the insight that was going to be shared was decided last Rosh Hashanah. Now next week, on Friday afternoon, as the sun goes down, Hashem concludes that conversation. Whatever the theme was, whatever the message was that was launched last Rosh Hashanah, we're now about to enter the space where Hashem says, let me think about what I should say for next year. In other words, when Hashem puts something into the speech channel, so that's it, it's been decided, that's how it's going to flow. There might be some minor modifications, this person might have that experience, that person might be able to change their circumstances, but the general flow is going to be on that particular theme. When we get to the new Rosh Hashanah, that's when Hashem says that theme is now suspended. And for the next year, I'm going to speak a new theme. Now, it might look very similar to the previous theme. That's why some years seem to be quite similar to others. Or there's the possibility that maybe I'm going to think of something completely different, and therefore I'll speak a theme which is completely different. So as the sun goes down on Rosh Hashanah, the process of dynamic, active speaking suspends. It's quite significant this year because it's Friday going into Rosh Hashanah, and we're told that every Friday there's a certain slowing down of the pace of Hashem's speaking. In the Kabbalists, they call it's like a kind of a state of sleep. It's almost like, when a person mumbles in their sleep. So they're still saying things, and obviously in Hashem's case, whatever Hashem says has an impact, but it's not as focused and it's not as clear. So the world is in a state of suspended animation from sunset on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And we don't know what's going to be said next. We don't know what's going to be said next. But what is going to be said next will have everything to do with what we show as an audience. Are we distracted? Okay, listen, I think it was a rough year this past year. So quite honestly, Hashem, I'm not so interested. I didn't enjoy the lesson of the last year. It didn't really talk to me. So I'm a little bit distracted this year. That's not a good way to go into Rosh Hashanah. Incidentally, one of the things that the Kabbalists tell us on Rosh Hashanah is that we shouldn't talk. We should reserve our speaking, certainly for the first, call it 12 hours or so of Rosh Hashanah. We should reserve that the only things we talk are words of Torah and words of davening and words of Tehillim. because that shows that we're still interested. That shows that we want to talk a language that Hashem wants to talk, so to speak. And then it comes to the morning of Rosh Hashanah, and we blow the shofar. That's the that's this primal sound that says, Hashem, we're in, we're ready, we're committed, we want to do, we're listening to whatever it is that you're going to tell us, and we'll be 100% in for whatever that requires of us. So the shofar is not a fancy speech or a fancy musical piece. It's a very simple sound, but it's a sound of readiness. It's a sound saying, we are wanting to listen. We want to hear what you have to say. We want to hear what you expect of us. And whatever it is, we'll do our level best to be able to fulfill it. So when we blast that shofar, that is, so to speak, what wakes the new speech for the new year. And that's where things begin to activate. So what we do from as Rosh Hashanah comes in until we blow the shofar might be the most critical thing that we do in terms of defining the nature of the year to come. Now, that's going to leave us with a big question, because this year Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos and we don't blow the shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. So then what? Okay, that we'll have to talk about, please God, next time.